presentation. I would now like to introduce our panel chair, Ian McGarrigle, Chairman of the World Retail Congress. Ian has worked in journalism, publishing and event organizing for the retail industry for over 30 years, in particular with Retail Week, where he was part of the launch team and became editor then publisher. Ian was also involved with Retail Solutions, Retail Interiors, Retail World, and in 2007 developed and helped launch the World Retail Congress and Awards, where he is now chairman.
Thank you very much, and good morning everyone who is listening in to this special webinar. My name, as you've heard, is Ian McGarrigle. I'm chairman of the World Retail Congress, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the business USP of being British. And on behalf of UK Trade and Investment and Spring Fair, World Retail Congress, Autumn Fair, Pure London and the Jewellery and Watch Fair Birmingham, thank you for listening in. And to help us over this next hour, it's my very great pleasure to introduce our two special panelists who are going to help us talk through some of the key issues, and then we're going to open up to the questions that you've already sent in. And please do keep sending the questions in during the live broadcast, and we will answer as many as we possibly can. And those that we aren't able to, we will certainly aim to get back to you after this live broadcast. But it's now my great pleasure to introduce our first panelist, who's Eric Musgrave, who's the editorial director of Drapers. And for anyone in the British fashion industry, Eric probably needs very little or no introduction. He's been writing about, observing and analysing the fashion sector for 35 years. And he is, as I say, editorial director of Drapers, which is the UK's preeminent source of fashion business intelligence, and has been publishing since 1887. I believe it's one of the oldest business trade magazines in the UK. And Eric will bring his insight into observing, well, obviously British fashion and British brands, but really how they're placed on the international scene, because Eric is very well travelled and attends all of the key fashion shows. And he's also an author. He wrote and published the best-selling book Sharp Suits, which is a history of men's tailoring. And it's unfortunate this is an audio broadcast, because Eric was wearing a very striking jacket this morning. But our next panelist is Neil Gorquin, who's General Manager of Disaster Designs. And Neil brings over 20 years experience working in retailing for some great brands, but actually joined the House of Disaster, which is Disaster Designs, in 2009. And it's one of the a really fast-growing British giftware brand that, and obviously very relevant to our discussion this morning, is selling around the world in a range of countries, and that portfolio of countries is increasing. So I think we'll be able to bring a lot to the discussion. In fact, to start us off, I think it'd be really useful, Neil, if you could, I gave a very sketchy introduction to Disaster Designs there, but it'd be great, and we've got a few slides, I believe, just to help the audience understand a little bit more about the House of Disaster. Yeah. So if you could talk through that.
Obviously, for those few people who aren't aware of the brand, yeah, Disaster Designs, we've been around for about 25 years, I think. It's our 25-year anniversary this year. We are designers and manufacturers of quirky lifestyle gifts and fashion accessories, which we design everything in-house, and then we manufacture in the Far East and China. And I suppose in terms of our business overseas, that's something that, you know, we've always had some pockets of business, but we've really seen that sort of increasing in the last five years or so. Mm-hmm. So yes, that's
great. Thanks. Eric, I wanted to sort of turn to you first. And as I mentioned in your introduction, you know, for many years travelled around the world, attending not just the international fashion shows, but visiting retailers and brands. I'm really interested to get your perception of what, to the topic of this webinar, which is about being British. I mean, we're interested to get your thoughts on what you've perceived over the years Britishness actually means out there in the international fashion world and the retailers that you know around the world.
Okay, thank you, Ian, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, the interesting point I think about Britishness, it can be different things to different people. Immediately one thinks of the sort of British heritage of such venerable British brands such as John Smedley, the fine knitwear people that was founded in 1784. Burberry, now obviously a global luxury brand, founded in 1856. Churches, the Northampton shoe manufacturer, 1873. Aquascutum, now owned by Chinese owners, famous for its raincoats, 1851, and so it goes on. So we've got those heritage brands to begin with, but then we've also got, in no particular order, modern, I would say, youth culture brands. Ben Sherman, which has been around since 1963, had its origins in the mod movement of that period. Certainly abroad, Ben Sherman presents itself as a British brand very involved with the music business. So from the days of the Beatles onwards, UK has been a source of huge music stars, and often the lure of fashion is very strong, hence Pretty Green, the men's fashion label set up by Liam Gallagher of Oasis, is another good option. Then we can go on to British designers. There's the most fantastic exhibition on at the V&A here in London, Savage Beauty, a retrospective of Alexander McQueen, probably the biggest British name of designer name of recent years. But one thinks of people like Stella McCartney. One thinks of people like John Galliano, recently brought back into the fold, and even people who don't trade under their own names, such as Phoebe Philo, designer at Celine. So there's a lot of different elements of Britishness, and in the modern world, of course, the world is very small, so we're finding that British companies that have their own brands, such as ASOS, for example, our biggest, probably our biggest online-only operator, is another expression of Britishness. And then we can go on to the high street, thinking of Topshop, Oasis, Mothercare. Even Harvey Nichols just opened a new branch in Baku in Azerbaijan. So these are also very distinctly British companies, and whether they trade on that Britishness overtly or covertly, they definitely are recognised as British brands.
It's interesting you mention ASOS. I mean, do you see British qualities or a British sort of handwriting around that website? Because there's obviously many fashion portal websites around the world. I mean, do you look at it and see, or do you get feedback from people that they identified as British?
Well, all the websites tend to look the same because they have a certain functionality, and how the online companies tend to work is they start with English language, and then as they get bigger they go into various languages. I think, if I remember correctly, ASOS has now got something like 7 different languages around the world to feed the market, which I definitely think is the way the successful companies should operate. But I think people do recognise that ASOS is based in London, and that an element of Britishness, which I didn't mention earlier, is the actual fact of being from London. Is a sort of a jewel within the British crown, say from London, whether that's from Knightsbridge or from Shoreditch. It has a resonance around the world.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and that's certainly as I see it too, there's that, certainly in fashion, there's the heritage element, and then there's the very contemporary. But are there kind of words or qualities that you see that are uniform across those different brands in those different sectors that international buyers in particular look to? So what I'm thinking of, is quality a key factor there? And people talk about on the contemporary side, it's that kind of British quirkiness that people often cite.
I think one of the difficulties for anybody wishing to sell abroad, there's no one thick and fast answer to this question, because an element currently of very successful British, I won't say production because it might not be made here, but British design is the fast fashion world, where it's not meant to last very long. Whereas, you know, if you're buying something like a Burberry raincoat or a John Smedley Sea Island cotton, you're buying something which has some longevity built into it. That is presumed. But I don't think you have to do one or the other. You have to be very clear about what your USP is for what particular market you're going to. So also that's another thing we'll perhaps be touching on, is that what might work in one market is less effective or perhaps even totally irrelevant in another market. So if we look at the close markets such as Europe, the fact that the big markets for what I call British heritage goods would be Italy, would be Germany, Scandinavia, to a lesser degree Spain. Everybody has difficulty selling to France, as we know, but those people, they buy Church's shoes because they are British. I mean, in fact, the company is now owned by the Prada family. They liked the company so much they bought it. And there's a real appreciation in certain markets for that sort of quality level, where in other markets I just see what they like is the design, the verve, the quirkiness, all the qualities that we would associate with young fashion coming out of the UK.
Yeah. So Neil, listen to what Eric's saying. How does that translate into your view of what Britishness means in your sector, which is giftware? And I know obviously in your retail career you've worked across different sectors, but within the giftware sector, how do you summarise Britishness?
I think it's interesting to talk about this. That obviously there is this appeal of sort of premium heritage brands. But I think, obviously the European market or the overseas market has those different layers, as does the UK market. So I guess there is something that we do as a business that appeals. There's a Britishness that appeals to the profile of customers that we sell to in Europe. I mean, for us, because we work with some selected licensed products and images, they've been a very good way for us to tap into other markets, because we work with the Beatles sort of imagery to create collections of bags and lifestyle products. So that's been a really good link for us, because obviously that's such a recognisable British band, and likewise things like.
So do they sell better internationally than, say, in Britain, for instance? Those kind of products?
I think they're interesting, those products, because they don't necessarily sell in. We've got a very a wide customer base, and they sell really well in selected stores in certain environments. But yeah, certainly there's some key good customers in the States, for instance, that buy a lot of Beatles-related products, and so that is really good business for us. And likewise, things like we worked more recently with Jan Constantine, whose kind of signature look is a reworking of very British icons. The Union Jack, the crowns, and things like that. Also, have been sort of a good way in for us into like the Japanese market, for instance, where those sort of almost quite obviously British products sell really, really well. But I suppose also we found, for us, which is interesting as a brand, that maybe those licensed products are a way in to those markets, but then you do find that those customers then often buy, sort of some of our own, sort of designed products as well. So although that's kind of maybe the link in the first way, and then they end up looking at other products within the collection and buying those.
Yes, yeah. So, Eric, turning back to you, and so again, I'm sorry for not harking back on how many years you've been following the sector, but where do you think we are now in terms of the appeal of Britishness? Would you say it's stronger than you've ever seen it, or it's changed into a different kind of demand? How would you summarise the power of Britishness around the world?
I think it's a constantly moving thing, Ian, and I don't think there's a period when you can say it's up or it's down. I think personalities have a huge impact, and I think British fashion per se had a huge fillip a few years ago when Diana, Princess of Wales, was such an ambassadress for the industry, and now she's been replaced by the Duchess of Cambridge. So as we've seen, anything that the Duchess of Cambridge wears, and she does tend to have a bias towards wearing British brands, immediately sells out. We had an email the other day at work, somebody said about how quickly it takes for the website to crash. A little bit of gallows humour there, but in fact it didn't crash. But that, that is the royal family and all the connections appeal to a certain bunch of consumers around the world, and it could be different people. If we go back to what Neil was saying about the Japanese market, very, very important for British exports, and one where something like the royal warrant being displayed on a face shirt or on a label actually means something to those consumers, very, very well informed, where I would imagine something like that perhaps doesn't mean so much, say, in Russia, where maybe they require some other buttons to be pressed, maybe to be used shorthand of something a bit more glitzy and a bit more obviously expensive and luxurious. So I don't think, one thing I do think is important is the strength of the pound or the weakness of the pound.
Yeah,
it's very, very easy to track how popular British products are against the strength of the pound. So we're here partly to talk about Pure London, Women's Wear Fair. I mean, over the years, it's been going since 1997. We absolutely know when the pound is strong or the euro is weak, then the foreign visitors from the eurozone goes down. When the things are reversed and the pound is weak and the euro is strong, boy, do they turn up coming along to buy what they perceive as very good value stuff from the UK. So, you know, Neil will know far more about the pleasures and pitfalls of having to deal with world currencies, but it is a factor. I think. You know, I think we've got to remember that Britain is, you know, in the arts, in music, with the royal family, with its history, we did have the biggest empire in the world. You know, we have got amazing reach, with probably the only one that can probably rival us is probably the USA because of the cultural, the music, the arts, the movies and so on, and that spirit of adventure. Britain has got lots of unique qualities which smart people, which I'm sure there's a lot of them among our listeners this morning, will be able to draw upon depending on which market they're going for.
Neil, I really want to ask you about your export markets and how you've built that international side. I don't know if you could just talk us through the countries that you're in and how that developed.
Well, we've got, I suppose, we're working mostly on quite classic distribution partners really through Europe. So we've got a lot of business in Spain. That's been really well established actually for probably 15 years, but really, I mean, ironically, having a huge amount of growth in the last 3 or 4 years. You know, when Spain often has this sort of press of being, you know, really struggling. Actually, we're making real inroads in that market. We've also got distribution partners in Germany, in Italy, Holland and Belgium, and I suppose you can see, I think, that some of the, if you look at the nature of our products, you know, they're quite quirky. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot of detailing on them. They're not, you know, they're not sort of minimal or simple designs. And I think you can see that, you know, they've been more successful in markets where that look is perhaps more of a, you know, on trend. For instance, in Spain, you know, they love those sort of very ornate and, you know, like the Spanish Ranta Signal, or, you know, there's definitely an appeal there, I think, that you can see where Disaster has served well. And
how did you, did Spain find you, or did you say that's going to be our first market? Because it wouldn't necessarily be, as Eric was saying, you know, you could list a series of countries and maybe Spain wouldn't necessarily be number one.
I mean, historically, we had a lot of connections with the Spanish market because our sister brand, Religion Clothing, was selling a lot into the Spanish market. Right. So I think we already had those connections were there. And often I think it is it's finding the right partner in those countries. I think sometimes, you know, you can start working with one person who seems to have the right profile, but for whatever reason it just doesn't quite work. So I think we've found in Disaster that it's very much looking at, you know, I suppose not tying yourself into something for a long period of time, talking to potential partners, maybe working together for a few months, see how the business works, and then reviewing, and, you know, if you have to have a wave goodbye and move on to the next, that's sort of how it works.
And what further international ambitions do you have? Which countries are you looking at next?
Well, we don't have a lot of business in France, which we really want to change. I mean, we have just started working with some agents in France recently, so I'm hoping that that's going to make a big difference. We're looking, I guess, more towards, you know, some of the American markets. I mean, that's something that we haven't really scratched the surface of yet, to be honest. We've got some good key accounts there, but we can see from how that business is performing that there's definitely scope for us to have a lot more business there. Mm-hmm. It's just trying to work out the best strategy and the best way to move that forward.
Yes, yes. If you could summarise kind of the lessons that you've learned over the years in terms of developing those European markets, or mistakes maybe in them.
Well, yes, lots of mistakes on a daily basis, actually. I think it's important not to just try to use the same model in every country. I mean, I think you know, we have got a classic distribution relationship in some countries where you know, we're working with someone who's already has established contacts and a market there, so they then order, you know, volume from us. We ship it directly into their central warehouse, and then they distribute it locally within that country, and that does work really well in lots of environments. They then attend trade events in that country, so obviously you know, they know the market well. They know how, you know, they know how to target the customers, etc. But then I think we find in some countries that hasn't worked, and sometimes it's hard to identify why, but you just find a different way to work. So in some countries we're working more with agents, but then we're shipping orders directly to the final customer from our warehouse in the UK. So I think it's sort of having some flexibility to be open to start negotiations with a potential partner, whoever that is, and then find a way for both your businesses to work together.
Yes, yes. So it's interesting to pick up on what markets might be next. I've been monitoring some of the questions we've started to receive, and please do keep sending your questions through. But Eric, a few questions people are asking, and you've touched on this in terms of countries for, and a few questions in particular for, you know, for high-end British brands and jewellery brands. You know, which international markets would you say particularly like British products?
I will mention a few. I should just mention now, there's for any exporters or would-be exporters, there's plenty of help to be had. I mean, UKTI, UK Trade and Investment, government body exists to help export all British products, not just fashion products. So in my experience, they've been very helpful and very knowledgeable. Also a trade association such as UK Fashion and Trade Association, Fashion and Textile Association, of which I used to be CEO, is also very helpful. They, the association administers a number of the grants that assist exporters in the fashion and textile area. Again, the people there are very knowledgeable, can tell you where successes are to be had and where problems await you, and so on. And then, you know, something like the British Footwear Association is very good for the footwear side. And really, it's interesting that while one received wisdom is, you know, China is a great untapped market, and India must be a huge market, and so on. They're also extremely difficult to work and also extremely difficult to make money from. Whereas right on our doorstep, we have got Europe, which is by far the biggest, the biggest recipient. I mean, actually, the Irish Republic is a huge market for British goods as well. So we've got the all the obvious wealthy countries, or countries that have wealthy people, are attractive. But we can't just talk of Europe as one place. It's very complicated. So you can't really sell to Holland or the Netherlands the same way you'd sell to Belgium. It's next door neighbour, because the culture, they're quite different. And for example, Germany sounds a great place to sell to because it's the biggest population in Europe. It's the strongest economy in Europe, but it's also particularly finicky. And I know plenty of British brands have founded there because the German expectation on quality is not matched by some of the British brands. I'm not an expert in jewellery, I'm afraid, so I'm going to have to pass on that one. But then the other areas for clothing, which are traditionally very popular, are US, again, huge consumer market, also one that can take expensive product. And Japan, even though it's probably been in an economic doldrums for 20 years, continues to be a crucial market for many.
One of the strongest markets.
Yes, and his long-standing Japanese partner is now the major. Sorry, he's the minority stakeholder in Paul Smith Limited. Yeah, exactly. I mean, for example, I know that much of Paul's success, for all Paul's success in Japan, he's struggled over the years trying to make an impact in Germany, for example. So, you know, few people are universally successful everywhere. You know, there are peaks and troughs to be had. But there are, as in many things in fashion, there's no sort of secret recipe that somebody's just going to stumble over. Good markets have probably been good markets for quite a while, and tough markets have been tough markets for quite a while. One interesting point which several people have referred to, me to over in recent years is having a website is an interesting way, a transactional website is an interesting way of finding where your products are really popular. So you know, people have said to me, well, we didn't target Australia, but we're getting so many requests for, you know, for product, so many orders there. We found ourselves an agent or a distributor. I mean, Neil's right, there are many different routes to market.
And I think you're right, it's not to be underestimated, the power of the internet to kind of test which markets are.
Totally, absolutely. The other thing, just to go back to the UKTI and UKFT, some markets have lots of hidden barriers or not so hidden barriers. So, for example, it's import duties in places like India and many places in South America are exceptionally high, and you know, very smart people will tell you there's just really no chance of getting any significant business. If you're going into a market where you're aiming at a luxurious customer, well, that luxurious customer is probably an international traveller, so they can come and buy it from Knightsbridge or they can buy it in Dubai. So sometimes you may well be selling to, let's say, Argentinians, but you're not selling them in Argentina. You're selling them in another capital, quite possibly London.
Neil, picking up on Eric's point about the power of the internet, I mean, what's the approach at the House of Disaster in terms of, we've actually seen a few questions come through about how you use social media and how you use the internet and thinking about the image of the brand through using those channels.
I think for Disaster, we, in terms of that, of marketing ourselves as a brand, I think obviously we don't have a transactional website. We have a trade website which has got limited access, and we recently launched a House of Disaster blog simply because we seem to get more feedback from the final customer of Disaster that they wanted to know more about the brand, and you know, for a long time the only information they had was via the retailers that bought our products. So I suppose as a brand we're still growing and we're still looking at those opportunities to sort of flesh out our brand story, I suppose, and make it something that is more appealing to the final customer. I suppose in terms of the way in terms of marketing, we spend a lot of time looking at our trade show presence and how we present the brand in those environments. So I suppose it's more for us, we're marketing to the buyers of the retailers rather than more to the final customer. But that's something that I suppose in terms of we really try to work with our partners in other countries to have a similar presentation at trade shows. So if we're showing at Pure London, for instance, then we take photographs of those shows, send them to our distributor in Italy, who then takes inspiration from those photographs on then launching that product in Italy. So that in that way we do want to have some consistency with how the brand's presented, even with those, when we're working with another partner that's not our business, we still want to make that strong.
Well, there's a good point there, Neil, that it's quite smart to, instead of trying to learn everything you possibly can say about the Spanish market, better just to find an expert in the Spanish market to do it for you. So goes back to our earlier point. There's lots of different ways into different markets. So I think it's very smart that you're looking for good stockists that can take your brand and present it in an appropriate way for their market. So I think it'd be quite wrong for you to, or any brand, to dictate to a foreign buyer what they should be buying and not buying, because they would know, or they should know what's going to best resonate with their local customers.
Yes, definitely. And I think we have a very strong identity as in terms of the look and feel of our designs. But I don't think I don't think there's a point where perhaps going to discuss about trying to second guess another market or design specifically for another market. I mean, it's not something we've ever thought about doing. We just are working on. We have a strong sort of identity and concept that we want to work with within our design team, and we just work along those lines. And then we do historically then look at how those products have sold in other territories and think, oh well, the Spanish market, they love this specific style of bag, and they seem to sell much better in Spain than they do here. So that is food for thought and interesting in developing product going forward. But I think we don't try to second guess those markets. I think it's important to have a strong feel of what you want the brand to be and what its identity is, and then it will appeal to other markets.
That's really, we'll come back to that point actually, but I want to just again monitoring the questions that come in, and you both touched on it. It seems what's really fundamental is how do you approach a market. I mean, someone's asked here, how do we talk to a department store? You've only got one chance at it. How do we find the right agents? How do we work out the best distribution? Is it direct? I mean, you both touched on it. Obviously, there's clearly no one right answer for even within a brand.
I think it's. We've worked with different department stores in recent years. We've sold product to John Lewis. We're working with House of Fraser at the moment. I think sometimes if you haven't sold products into department stores, you sort of have this block or this fear about the department store buyer, and that you might only have one chance to sell the product, and if they don't like it or the pricing is wrong or whatever it is, it's not going to work. But I don't think that is the case. I think department stores are a business like any other, that it's very fluid. Things are changing all the time. Trends are changing. I think just because you're not successful pitching a product at one specific moment in time doesn't mean that the door's closed for you for the future. But I think there's just very different channels, the way that you find and meet buyers. I suppose you might meet them at a trade event, and then nothing happens for two years. Or I think the whole thing about selling product into any environment is it's quite a fluid process, and you make contacts over a period of time, and I think you have to.
And do you talk to other brands? I mean, and I'm sure, Eric, you get asked a lot about, can you recommend a distributor or agent? I presume that the power of networking.
I get asked all too often. All too often. Eric's free information service. But it's a good way. I mean, I always think the fashion industry, on the one hand, is a huge global industry. On the other hand, it is actually quite a small community. And while there is competition, I often find that particularly smaller companies are quite happy to help each other. Mm-hmm. And I think the number one thing to say is you have to research the market or the company that you wish to sell to really well, and you have to think what benefit to them is selling my business. We know what the benefit to your brand is, but you've got to get into the buyer's mind and present it yourself in a way that they'll say, these people understand me, they understand my business, they understand my adjacencies, they're explaining to me why their brand will fit into my current offer. So the harsh realities of life is that there's no brand on this earth that has a divine right to existence. They've all got to carve a niche, which could be a very large niche or a very small niche, and you've got to be mindful of trying to get into the mindset of the person you're trying to sell to, and that's very difficult. And that's why I would say one point I would make about the whole exporting idea is reduce your horizons to begin with. Don't say I'm going to sell to 12 foreign countries next year. I'm going to do one, I'm going to do quite an easy one, or what appears to be an easy one, to learn some of the ropes, rather than saying, I think I'm going to go to Azerbaijan because there aren't any British brands there. Well, there's probably a very good reason why there are no British brands there. So go to somewhere where there is already a proven appetite for British brands, and then you're more likely to find an agent who is the right person to sell your sort of product. And everybody I speak to said it takes, unless you're extraordinarily lucky, it takes a lot longer to build up a business in export than you would like. So I see people who go to foreign fairs. So we're talking here about pure London, of course, but people go to, let's say, Bread and Butter when it was going, or they go to Paris Pret or something, and they go one season and say, oh, I didn't get any orders, and so it didn't work for me. Well, I know, because I've been told by people in Germany, that in Germany the way the buyers would shop the fair is they'd wander around, and if you're new, they sort of note that you were new, looks quite interesting, don't even go on the stand, come back next season 6 months later, back again, still there, okay, so the summer product's different to the winter, okay, fine. It's only in the third time, your third showing, that they actually walk on the stand to engage in conversation. So this is just anecdotal background, but it's, to go abroad, you've got to take a long-term view, and I'm not sure British nature has that quality. They want sort of instant gratification. I mean, particularly people who are trying to, sell into really alien markets, such as China, where there's huge cultural difference, language difference, temperature difference, body shape difference. It's going to take a while. It's going to, and if you think the market truly is potentially big enough, then it's worth the investment.
Yes, I think that's very true, actually. I mean, I think trade events are, they can be a great way to write a lot of orders, and obviously that, is a brilliant experience when you're at a trade event and you write a lot of orders. I think what you say is right. You have to have a bit more of a long-term view, particularly if you're looking to exhibit overseas, and you can't just expect to pitch up with a small booth in a probably a poor location in the hall, and then just think, oh, actually that didn't work for me. I'm not going back, because often you have to work with that particular fair for a number of seasons to get. To work forward and get a better position in the hall, become more recognised to the buyers. I think you're right. We were at a show in Sweden last year, actually, and which actually was good. And we a number of orders were placed. We found some new customers, but you can definitely see that that the established gift Scandinavian brands have been in the same position, in the same hall for 10, 15 years, and people turn up on Sunday and they have their itinerary of, right, I go and see them and have a drink and we chat for 25, and they're intrigued by you, but I don't think they would even step on the stand until about Wednesday, because they're busy seeing their established brands. So it's but it's interesting.
The retail world has changed enormously since 2008, and the pressure on retailers to be different and to win our customers as consumers is ever tougher. But has that translated into the buyer's mentality that actually they're much more open-minded, and they are, of course, they will have their established relationships, but they are more hungry to find and discover new brands that aren't just the heritage brands, but they are looking for the new and the quirky. British, ideally. I mean, would you say that's true, or do you still have to really work at it?
I think the market is very full of a lot of product. So I think the buyers obviously are looking for newness and a new angle on something, and you do hear that a lot anecdotally from buyers. That they at fairs where they walk around shows and then say, oh, I just cannot find anything new. But it's difficult to create new things. So I think that is just the nature of the buying dilemma, to try and find a new angle on something that is going to appeal to a different customer, perhaps. Than,
so assuming an international buyer has crossed that threshold onto your stand, and they clearly like what they're seeing, what tends to be the checklist of things that is in their mind just to so they're giving themselves comfort that yes, they can place an order with you. And again, I've seen this coming through a lot of the questions that people are sort of, you know, how do I make that breakthrough? How do I establish that rapport with a buyer?
I mean, I think if you're looking to work with a potential distributor, for instance, I mean, we always get, you know, various inquiries from different people at different shows, and I guess the first thing is to look at the profile of their business and what other brands are they working with currently, because that's a way for you to see if it's, you know, the product that you're selling is a good fit with what they sell currently. So, and sometimes you get inquiries from potential people, and when you look at the profile of who they're working with, you think, really, do you think this is going to work so well for you? Because I'm not seeing the connection. But then other times you see there's a great fit, and you think, oh yeah, this is, I can really see the potential here, because I suppose within the industry you get to know the brands that you sit alongside in stores. So if that person is the distributor in that country for one of those brands, you know that pretty much is going to be a good fit.
Yes, yeah.
But I think sometimes things develop in quite an organic way. You know, we've had some customers in the past who just bought from us for, say, 1 or 2 standalone stores in a country, and then 3-4 years down the line, they, because of the success they've had with the product, they want to look at then distributing within their local market. So I think sometimes you know, you don't just get an inquiry from someone that you know, says, oh, I'm a distributor and I've got, you know, 50 different accounts I'm working with and I want to do this. It sort of can develop in a more organic way, and then they feel more confident with the product because they've already had some experience of selling it in their own stores, and those sort of relationships work out really well because they're sort of more natural rather than someone placing a huge order for a lot of product, throwing it into the market and it not quite working because they've not really tested the waters.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, Eric, any thoughts on that in terms of?
Well, I think the internet is a great boon in terms of research. Many of the questions we're receiving here from our listeners are about, you know, is this country good? How do we get to that country, and so on. These days, you know, for example, the question here is Poland a good area for British brand? I mean, certainly I don't hear it being talked about as a great gold mine for British brands, but it depends what British brands you're selling. And you know, you can do things like, for example, find out what the demographic mix is of a country. So if they've got lots and lots of young people and you're selling a very classic, you know, British heritage royal family collection, that probably may not be fertile ground. But if you're doing fast fashion, party clothes, going out clothes, inexpensive fashion, it may be a logical conclusion to think, well, those young people there may like this look. Also, when it comes to sort of major retailers, I imagine if one was to type in department stores in Poland in Google, you'll get a long list of department stores. Then you can go to their websites and click on. You can easily find out with Google Translate what the Polish brand stocked is, and then have a look at what they stock. Now, if they don't stock anything that's in any way like your brand or anything from Britain, you could be confident and say that's because they've never had a British brand, or you might say, you know what, I think that's going to be a really hard sell there because they don't do anything like I've got, so why don't we go somewhere else that does? So I think that's the number one. There's a huge amount of research to be done before you, as a brand or as a retailer, would charge off into a new country and sort of.
Again, sorry on that. Just to interrupt on that point, we've had a couple of questions I think about. You know, you've mentioned the help you can get from UKTI and other bodies, but I guess some people have asked, well, is there a sort of almost entry-level sort of desk research that should be done, can be done quite easily? Is it valid to do that? I don't know what experience you've had.
I always remember talking to George Davies, creator of Next. George had Per Una. I know he's got another one called FG4. He told me that his best research when he's looking at shops is just to walk the streets that you're thinking of selling in. And so I think if you're thinking of going to a market, what's wrong with actually going to a market? Going to a market. So I'm going to spend, you know, a long weekend or, you know, 3 days, and I'm going to go and actually have a look. So if I want to sell to France, I'll go and have a look at actually what is around in Paris, and I will try and find it's quite easy these days again to look on a website of a British brand that you like or admire or you think you're similar to and find out what their foreign representation is. That is often the case. So you say, oh, so they've got Pierre Leblanc in Paris. Well, while I'm there, or before I go, I'll get in touch with Pierre Leblanc and see if he'd also like to take my brand, or if he doesn't, does he have a friend who also does similar things? Because that community of agents, they also, well, they are competitors. In my experience, they also pass references onto people.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in personal contact. I'm a great believer for tramping around shows. As you mentioned, Dean, I've been to hundreds of shows over the years. I've got millions of contacts simply by physically going. And these days, certainly I find with my younger colleagues, there's a tendency to do everything by email, never even pick up the phone to somebody. And I think there's a great advantage of actually going to a fair, having a look around, see who's representing a British brand. You can go to, the German fairs or the fairs in Holland, and you think, oh, I wonder if there's anybody here from the UK office. There often isn't. It's just the local distributor. So there you've got somebody to talk to and say, well, I do a complementary brand. Would you like to represent me?
Pick up on that point, I mean, in your observation, as you said, you've gone around trade shows all over the world, and I guess you must have come across British brands trying to break through there. And as you say, Neil, you're more than likely going to be in a far corner of somewhere. But the challenge is, how do you make that noise? How do you get yourself noticed? I mean, I just wonder, have you over the years, seen some great examples as well as probably, I'm sure, some bad examples, and just really, how do you establish that presence to make a,
well, looking at my point of view, I mean, what's really tragic is, when I go to pure London, and I'm wandering around there on a Sunday, and somebody reaches up and gives me a press release and say, oh, we're here, and you think, well, why didn't you tell me 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago? And we're a weekly magazine. We could have put something in which may have reached buyers before they come.
Yeah.
What am I going to do now? Put you in next week and say this is what you missed at Pure. So even simple things like that. In most major countries have at least one title akin to Drapers, which is the #1. So Textile Wirtschaft in Germany, Journal de Textile in France, Women's Wear Daily in America, and there'll be other ones as well. It behoves people who are going into a market and actually have a point of contact in that market to get in touch with those trade press. The other thing that's very, I wouldn't say easy to do, but is another option these days, is to start getting into social media in the country, start building up a little bit of traffic through bloggers or through your own social media, if your brand is appropriate to the demographic that uses social media heavily.
Neil, any sort of thoughts on things you've done well, things you can remember that you say, yeah, that really helped us get noticed and get a voice?
I think for us, it's I think rather than probably a little bit on what we touched on earlier about you don't identify a country and then just pitch up there. I think for us, it's been more a case of sort of building relationships that that have come from someone within that country, and that's where we've had the most success, I think. So it does take time.
So they've found you rather than you found them.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the way that's grown well for us is because then they maybe take a small space at a show within their country, alongside some of the brands that they're already selling. They've already got an established market of an established customer base, and then the business grows that way. So I suppose essentially we've ended up having a presence at lots of European shows, but we've never actually attended them ourselves. So it works really, really well.
Yes.
But that's down to the earlier point of leaving it to the local experts. I mean, it's very good if you become an expert in every major country in the world, but that's, unless you're somebody like Clark's, having had a global brand for many, many decades, it's a big challenge for a lot of people. I think the other thing to mention is, while we're talking about Britishness, I think in many cases Britishness is an advantage to bring to the party, but nobody is going to buy a bad collection because it's British. So it's got to be well designed, good value for money, appropriate to the market, and then for some people, and it could be quite a lot of around the world, the fact it's British or it's made in Britain, it's British designed, is another plus point. But I don't think anybody can sell a collection just because it's British. So it's another advantage. But you've got to do a lot of the other basics right as well.
One last important question. I want to return to the point you made earlier, Neil, about do you adjust your collection, your range per country? And again, we've had quite a few questions on this. And it's interesting, the World Retail Congress, we ran our Asia Pacific event last week in Singapore. We had Daniel Pietz, who's the main board director of LVMH. Obviously, LVMH has some of the best luxury brands in the world. And he said it's a simple rule. They will never change and adapt the collection to any market. It is Louis Vuitton or it's Louis Vuitton, etc. But obviously we know other retailers, other brands take a slightly different view. But what do you think is the right or wrong on this? Would you design a complete collection for, say, Spain or other?
No, I don't think we would do that, because I think the design process is very difficult in itself. I mean, I think we produce a lot of newness, twice a season, but it's very difficult. That process is a difficult process in itself to get to produce products that you feel happy with, that you feel have moved things forward, that are of the moment. And I think if you're also then trying to second guess another market that isn't your prime market, I think it's just sort of too many elements in the the guessing game of trying to second guess. I think sometimes inevitably some products won't work in another market, and that's just the way it is. But then if you have some products that do work there, then that's great. I mean, I do sometimes I had a sort of hilarious conversation with an American buyer who was looking at a little wash bag we had that had written on "Pucker Up, Buttercup," and she was saying, "Please, can you? What is this expression?" I was like, well, maybe let's use that one, but you can go with another style that is for perhaps of an international little one-liner. Yeah. But I think I think you have to feel strong in your brand values, and just put things out that you think, yeah, this is a great collection.
But I think the point from Louis Vuitton is right, but Louis Vuitton will probably have a huge collection, and as Neil has said, it won't sell universally the same worldwide. So there'll be things, whether it's colours, whether it's different types of leather, whether it's shapes of bag, will be selling better in some countries than other countries. On another one that this is a thing where it's just you just need some local knowledge, something as simple as men's shirts. So in the UK, we would say a men's formal shirt, right? Would normally not have a breast pocket on. That would be seen a little bit naff. But for example, in the Far East, it's really required, because there it's so warm. They often don't wear a jacket, and they need something to put credit card, pens, etc., etc. So it's just little bits of local knowledge. So you could have within your shirt range with a breast pocket, without a breast pocket. That is not really adapting your range. It's merely giving choices that are appropriate to the markets you go to.
Well, incredibly, and unfortunately we are sort of drawing to a close on our allotted hour. So in drawing to a close, I'd really like to ask Neil and Eric just for maybe some last sort of closing thoughts on, obviously the title of the webinar, as everyone knows, is Your Free USP Being British. I mean, from the discussion we've had, which has been fascinating, I mean, I wonder how you'd both sort of summarise the importance and the power of being a British brand, and what you need to bear in mind very, very quickly.
I think it's the Britishness is just part of your brand DNA, I guess. So I think at Disaster I don't think we really celebrate our Britishness in a sort of, oh, well, we must do this because it's really British and it'll really appeal. I think it just is part of what we do, because we are a British, we design in the UK, and I think it's sort of, then I think it's a happy accident in some ways that it does appeal to other markets, because just because there is a cachet for Britishness, but I don't think it's something that we really sort of, trade on, in a sense, in a sort of, in a way.
The importance of your uniqueness, it's your design, and I mean, whether that's perceived as Britishness, it's
yes, I think it is more that. And we are influenced by other, like maybe we love some Scandinavian brands, and they influence us, and you know, I think it's just it's a market of where, you know, you're aware of trends and fashions, and they are what influence you. But I think the Britishness is just something that we can't do anything about because it's there. But it's great that it also then appeals to other people.
I'd certainly echo the point Neil's making. You can play the British card strongly or very softly, or indeed not at all. I think that in many markets, in many product segments, there's a huge advantage of being able to say we are British. Whether that's we are British, we are cashmere from the Scottish borders, or whether we're an edgy brand from Spitalfields, they're both British, and you can play the national anthem in different ways. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, that brings us to a close. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you to everyone